Hey guys, how are you? So I think this is really about to be a Be Where You Are part two. If you haven't seen part one, please go on YouTube and check it out. And while you're there, please subscribe. So I really just feel like this is a time where God is trying to pack in what it really means to be content in this season. And that's really what Be Where You Are was about really being content in your season, knowing that you're here on purpose, knowing that God is doing something in you in this time, and knowing that it's not in vain and that not to run ahead of God. But in addition to just being content, I feel that content is inward, but also outwardly, we also need to be faithful to the things that God has already given to us. This reminded me of the parable of the talents, where the master who was pleased with his servants said, "Well done, good and faithful servants. Because you have been faithful with a few, I will put you in charge of many things." And it gets really easy to say that the focus of this scripture is that I will put you in charge of many things. But I really believe that the heart of this scripture was because you have been faithful with a few. I really believe that when these servants were pleasing to their master, their mindset wasn't, what will I be put in charge of next? But it was, how can I be faithful with what has already been given to me? And that really convicts me. I've been really going to God. God, show me, how can I live a life that's faithful to the things that you've already given to me? Not living with my mind and my life one step ahead, but truly being in this moment, content, inwardly content, and outwardly expressing that I'm truly dedicated and committed to the things that you have already laid before me. Am I committed in my finances? Am I a good steward in my finances to you? What about the time that you've given me, Lord? Am I truly productive in this time? Have I been a good steward with the time that you've allowed me? Or what about the job that I have now, God, in the areas that I serve in? Am I fully committed, or am I coming in with one foot out the door because I'm thinking about something ahead or focusing on something ahead? But God, I really want to be truly faithful to the things that you have here, not thinking about anything that's ahead. And with that, I'm like, God, just show me in your word somebody that you were pleased with that modeled how to be faithful with a few, because I really want to really take this and implement it into my life. And then I heard through a sermon the scripture, and it really spoke to what I've been asking God, and it was David. In 1 Samuel chapter 16 and 17, David, just a little background, David had been anointed by the Lord. Samuel was a prophet. God had told him he was going to anoint somebody. So David went to seek who God was looking to anoint. He came upon Jesse's house, who Jesse was David's father. And Samuel looked at all of David's brothers, and God said, no, these aren't them. And then he said, do you have anybody else? He said, yes. Do you have my youngest son, David? He's out with the sheep. And then David came in, and he said, yes, that's him. God spoke to him and said, yes, that's him. David was publicly anointed in front of his brothers and his father. And then afterwards, it says that David went back to tend the sheep, and his brothers went off to battle the Philistines. So even though David was anointed, his brothers went off to battle, but David still went back to the sheep. And so while the brothers were at battle against the Philistines came with their weapon, who was the giant Goliath. And all of Philistine was fearful of Goliath. All of Israel was fearful of Goliath. Nobody would go up against him. Day to day, Goliath came back waiting for somebody to come up against him, and nobody dared to go up against him. So David's father told him, go down from tending the sheep and take some food to your brothers to eat on the battlefield. So David took the food down to his brothers, and because the brothers were envious of David, they said this to him. They said, why have you come down here, and with whom did you leave those few sheep? There goes that word few again. When I heard somebody read this, though I've read this time and time again, the word few never jumped out so much to me. It was really illuminated. Here goes that word few again. So with whom did you leave those few sheep? So I'm like, God, yes, David had a few, Lord. Show me. How was David? He already knew he was anointed, Lord, that you had called him for great things. But how, Lord? How was he faithful to these few sheep? And like I said, Israel was really fearful of Goliath, but because of what David had done in his faithfulness to the few sheep, he was able to go up. He had the faith to go up against Goliath. And I just want to read here what happened when David went up against, I want to read here what David said to King Saul when he decided to go up against Goliath. 1 Samuel 17:34. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned to me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. Now, how monumental is it that David was so committed and dedicated to his few sheep that he was willing to risk his life to go after a bear and a lion for these sheep? How does that show such of a heart of a faithful servant that he's willing to lay it all down for a few sheep? Not because of the volume of the sheep or how many sheep there was, but because he fully understood that this is what has been put on his plate in this season, and this is what he is called to be a good steward to and to be faithful over. So he was fully committed to rescuing these sheep and serving these sheep in any way that needed to be done. And that speaks volumes, because when nobody was able to go up against the Philistine Goliath, because of the faith that God had put into David when he battled the lion and the bear, because David knew that God was with him and had saw him through battling the lion and the bear, he had faith knowing that God would be with him to go against Goliath. So it's because of his faithfulness to his few sheep that faith and character and humility and wisdom and all these things were imparted into David that had given him the ability and the faith to go against Goliath, and he was able to defeat Goliath. But one of the things that I keep asking myself, and I keep asking God, is, God, what if David saw the sheep as being a few sheep, saying, I've been anointed, God has more for me, these are just a few sheep. Go ahead, lion, take the sheep. Go ahead, bear, take the sheep. I got more things here. David would have never built what God was trying to do with him in that time, Then who would have defeated the Philistine? Who would have taken on Goliath? It's just really big to me. This is crazy that, not only is our faithfulness to our things in this season doing something in us, but other people are depending on it as well, that we need to be held accountable to the things that God has given us in this time, because other people are truly dependent upon it. So I'm really just seeking God, like, God, show me what it's like to be faithful, and just seeing how committed David was, changing the perspective of my mind. If I felt that in my life there was something menial that God has given me, it's changing that perspective and saying nothing that God has given to me is menial. Everything has a purpose in this time, and that God is looking for me to be a steward of this. This is what God has given me to be accountable for. And we have to be accountable to these things that God has given us. So it's really just holding on to that. And I just want to read one more scripture. 1 Corinthians 15:58 says, always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. So that speaks volumes, because it's saying always give yourself fully, but also that even if you're seeing it as menial, if these things don't count, that what you're doing, that everything counts, and that everything you're doing, nothing is in vain. So let's not treat it as we're just going along with the flow, but that we actually have accountability to what we're doing today, and that we're called to be faithful with everything that has been given us today. So let's be encouraged in that, not only inwardly content, knowing that God is doing something, but outwardly content and faithful to the things that God has given us on our plate today. Even if we're feeling like, God, I know you have more for me. Maybe he does, but right now this is where you are, and this is where you're called to be accountable to. So let's just be here, be where we are, knowing that God is doing something in us and for others around us. So walking week, here we are, being where we are, faithful with the things that God has given us. Yes, thank you. So check me out on YouTube and subscribe, guys. Please, if you haven't done so, subscribe on YouTube. And I'll see you guys later. Bye.